Some of the most powerful people in the world are not the ones who speak the most, they are the ones who know exactly who to ignore. Because the moment you stop reacting to certain people, something terrifying happens. They lose access to your emotions, and suddenly, they can no longer control you. Most people believe they understand the people around them because they listen to their words. But words are carefully managed. Human beings know how to appear loyal, caring, respectful, or interested when it benefits them socially. Real intentions are rarely exposed through conversation alone. They are exposed through deprivation specifically. The deprivation of attention, access, and emotional response. The moment you stop feeding someone your energy, you begin seeing their true psychological nature with disturbing clarity. Ignoring someone removes the emotional rewards they were unconsciously receiving from you, and once those rewards disappear, the mask often disappears with them. This is why silence is so revealing. Many people are emotionally stable only while they are being acknowledged, admired, or emotionally entertained. The moment you become less available, their behavior hangs rapidly. Someone who genuinely values you responds with patience and respect. But someone driven by ego, control, insecurity, or hidden resentment begins reacting differently. They may become passive-aggressive, suddenly cold, overly emotional, manipulative, or strangely desperate for your attention. What changed was not their character only, their access to you. Your absence simply exposed what was already living beneath the surface. There is a psychological reason this happens. Attention functions like emotional oxygen for many individuals. It validates their identity, importance, and influence. Some people do not actually care about connection, they care about emotional control. They want reassurance that they still occupy space inside your mind. This is why certain individuals provoke arguments after being ignored, post indirect messages online, suddenly act differently around others, or try to trigger jealousy. They are not responding to silence itself. They are responding to the loss of emotional influence. And nothing unsettles manipulative people more than realizing their presence no longer controls your emotional state. Watch human behavior carefully during NCE or withdrawal. It reveals more than years of forced closeness. The friend who disappears when they no longer benefit from your attention. The partner who becomes cruel when emotional control weakens. The coworker who grows insecure when validation stops. Silence acts like psychological pressure. Under pressure, hidden motives rise naturally to the surface. Most people accidentally expose themselves while trying to regain emotional access. What makes this uncomfortable is realizing how many relationships are built less on genuine connection and more on emotional dependency, validation, routine, or control. People often confuse attachment with loyalty because attention creates the illusion of intimacy. But remove your attention for a moment, and truth begins speaking through behavior instead of words. In the end, ignoring someone does not create their true nature, it reveals it. Because the fastest way to discover who someone really is to stop giving them the emotional access they were quietly using to control you. Most people believe being constantly available makes them more lovable, more valuable, and more important in the eyes of others. So they respond instantly, in themselves endlessly, tolerate emotional inconsistency, and make themselves psychologically accessible at all times. But human nature does not always reward unlimited access with respect. In fact, the opposite often happens. The more emotionally available you become, the more predictable you appear. And predictability quietly lowers psychological value because the human mind is instinctively drawn toward what feels difficult to fully possess or control. This truth becomes visible everywhere once you learn to observe behavior honestly. The employee who is always available eventually becomes expected, not appreciated. The friend who always forgives becomes emotionally taken for granted. The partner who constantly seeks reassurance slowly loses emotional mystery. People rarely announce this shift openly, but their behavior changes. Responses become delayed, respect becomes weaker, effort decreases. Why? Because when people become certain they will never lose your attention, they unconsciously stop valuing it with the same intensity. There is a deeper psychological mechanism beneath this. Human beings are emotional pattern recognition machines. We instinctively place value on earned. City, emotional uncertainty, and perceived independence. Someone who appears emotionally self-contained creates tension in the minds of others because they cannot be fully predicted. Their attention feels earned rather than guaranteed. This creates curiosity, respect, and psychological weight. But when someone becomes emotionally over-available, constantly seeking connection, approval, or validation, they accidentally communicate dependence. And dependence weakens influence because it reveals fear of rejection, abandonment, or emotional distance. This does not mean becoming cold or manipulative. That is where many people misunderstand the concept entirely. Emotional discipline is not about withholding affection for control. It is about maintaining self-respect and internal stability, regardless of other people's behavior. Strong individuals do not panic when someone becomes distant. They do not sacrifice dignity just to maintain emotional access. They understand that overextending emotional availability often attracts people who enjoy consuming attention more than genuinely valuing connection. Watch relationships carefully, and you will notice something uncomfortable. People earned often chase what feels emotionally difficult while neglecting what feels permanently secured. This is why emotionally independent individuals quietly command more respect. Their attention feels intentional, not desperate. Their presence feels chosen, not emotionally needy. And because they are not constantly trying to force connection, others begin investing more energy trying to understand and keep them. The harsh truth is that many people are not attracted to kindness alone, they are attracted to emotional strength. And emotional strength comes from knowing that your peace, your attention, and your emotional energy are valuable enough not to be available to everyone at all times. Because the moment people realize they have unlimited access to your emotions, they often stop treating those emotions as something rare. Most people underestimate silence because they mistake power for noise. They believe influence comes from speaking more, explaining more, defending more, reacting more, but silence operates differently. Silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the most psychologically uncomfortable experiences for the human mind. Human beings are constantly searching for earned emotional signals from others to feel secure. They want reassurance, validation, predictable reactions, and clear emotional feedback. The moment those signals disappear, the mind begins filling the empty space on its own. And that is where silence becomes dangerous. When you stop reacting emotionally, people begin reacting internally. They replay conversations repeatedly, searching for hidden meaning. They analyze your facial expressions, your distance, your delayed response, your absence of explanation. The silence forces them into self-confrontation. An insecure person begins wondering if they were rejected. A guilty person starts suspecting they were exposed. A manipulative person becomes anxious because their emotional influence no longer works. What makes silence so psychologically powerful is that it shifts emotional pressure away from you and onto the other person. Suddenly, they are no longer controlling the emotional atmosphere, they are trapped inside it. This is why emotionally reactive people often fear silence more than conflict. Conflict at least provides engagement, feedback, and emotional connection. Silence removes all of that. It creates an invisible psychological, earned, void that the human mind desperately tries to escape. Watch what happens during arguments. The calmer person who says less often controls the emotional direction of the interaction without force. Meanwhile, the emotional person begins over-explaining, raising their voice, exposing insecurity, revealing hidden frustration. Silence quietly pressures people into revealing themselves because most individuals cannot tolerate unresolved emotional tension. There is also a social truth hidden inside silence that few people fully understand. Silence creates projection. When people cannot clearly read your thoughts or emotions, they begin projecting their own fears, assumptions, and insecurities onto you. This is why silence can make someone obsess over your opinion even when you never spoke it aloud. The human mind fears ambiguity because ambiguity removes control, and what cannot be controlled often becomes psychologically consuming. Powerful individuals understand this instinctively. They do not rush to explain themselves to everyone. They do not interrupt emotional tension immediately just to make others comfortable. They know that silence reveals information words often hide. In birth, earned, business, relationships, friendships, and social dynamics, the person who remains composed in silence usually sees more than everyone else. While others speak emotionally to relieve pressure, the silent observer collects truth quietly. The uncomfortable reality is this: most people talk not because they are confident, but because they are afraid of what silence might expose both in themselves and in others. Because silence has a terrifying ability to force people into a conversation with their own mind, and many are not prepared for what they will hear there. Most people do not realize how much of their mental exhaustion comes from problems that were never truly theirs to carry. Drama survives by pulling emotional reactions out of people. It feeds on attention, outrage, defensiveness, gossip, and impulsive emotional involvement. And the dangerous part is that drama rarely introduces itself honestly. It disguises itself as loyalty, urgency, justice, or emotional importance. This is why intelligent people often become emotionally trapped without noticing it. They believe they are defending themselves, helping others, or proving a point, while in reality they are slowly surrendering. Their mental clarity to distractions designed to consume emotional energy. Human beings are deeply vulnerable to emotional stimulation. Conflict activates the ego. Gossip creates temporary feelings of connection. Arguments create emotional intensity that tricks the brain into feeling significant. But beneath that stimulation is depletion. Every unnecessary emotional battle leaves psychological residue behind: tension, frustration, overthinking, anger, anxiety. Most people carry these emotional toxins for days while pretending they are mentally strong. The truth is, constant emotional engagement weakens focus. A distracted mind becomes reactive instead of strategic, and reactive people are easy to manipulate because they no longer think clearly, they simply respond emotionally to whatever captures their attention. This is why emotionally disciplined individuals treat drama differently. They understand a hidden law of human behavior. Not every conflict deserves emotional participation. Some situations are designed purely to drain your peace and pull you into emotional chaos. Watch manipulative people carefully. They often create confusion, provoke emotional reactions, or spread news. Negativity, because emotionally exhausted individuals become easier to control. A calm person thinks independently. A frustrated person reacts impulsively. Drama is not always accidental. Sometimes it is a subtle form of psychological domination. There is also an uncomfortable social truth many refuse to accept. People who constantly live in drama often secretly need it. Without emotional chaos, they feel empty, unnoticed, or emotionally unstimulated. So they recreate tension repeatedly through conflict, gossip, victimhood, or emotional unpredictability. When you refuse to engage, they often become irritated because your emotional stability exposes their inner instability. Your silence removes the emotional fuel they were unconsciously feeding on. Powerful people understand that attention is a form of mental currency. Where your focus goes, your emotional energy follows. This is why protecting your peace is not weakness, it is strategy. Ignoring unnecessary drama allows your mind to remain sharp, observant, and emotionally balanced while others become consumed by emotional noise. The strongest individuals are not those who win every argument. They are the ones who recognize which battles are designed to waste their life force before the fight even begins. Because in the end, drama only controls people who feel emotionally compelled to respond to it. And the moment you stop reacting to every provocation, you begin reclaiming ownership of your mind. Most people believe communication is about words. They spend years learning how to sound intelligent, persuasive, calm, or confident, thinking language is what shapes perception. But human beings trust reactions far more than explanations. Words can be rehearsed. Reactions cannot. A reaction happens in the small moment before self-control returns, and in that moment people see the truth hiding underneath the performance. This is why others quietly study your reactions more carefully than anything you say. They watch what irritates you, what makes you defensive, what triggers insecurity, what causes emotional instability. Your reactions become psychological evidence revealing the parts of yourself you failed to hide. This process happens constantly in everyday life, often without conscious awareness. A coworker interrupts you repeatedly to see how much disrespect you tolerate. A partner suddenly becomes distant, learned to observe your emotional dependence. Someone criticizes you publicly not necessarily because they dislike you, but because they want to measure your emotional control under pressure. Human beings are constantly gathering emotional information from one another. Every visible reaction becomes data. The person who becomes angry too quickly reveals inner instability. The person who over-explains reveals fear of misunderstanding or rejection. The person who desperately seeks reassurance reveals emotional dependency. Reactions expose emotional weak points faster than honesty ever will. This is why emotionally manipulative individuals focus so heavily on provoking reactions instead of having direct conversations. Once they discover what emotionally controls you, they gain leverage. A jealous person may provoke insecurity subtly. A controlling person may use silence to create anxiety. A narcissistic person may withdraw validation to trigger emotional chasing. They are studying your emotional patterns because predictable reactions create psychological control. And most people make this process easy by reacting impulsively to every emotional trigger placed in front of them. Calm individua. And I understand something deeper. They know emotional control is not about becoming emotionless. It is about creating space between feeling and reaction. That pause changes everything. Because when people can no longer predict your emotional responses, they lose the ability to easily manipulate your mental state. Your calm creates uncertainty, and uncertainty quietly shifts power. There is also a disturbing truth hidden beneath social interaction. Many people respect emotional discipline more than emotional honesty. They may sympathize with emotional outbursts, but they instinctively trust and fear the person who remains composed under pressure. Composure signals inner control. And inner control is rare in a world where most people are ruled by impulse, ego, and emotional hunger. In the end, people rarely remember the speeches you gave them. They remember how emotionally controlled or emotionally weak you appeared when pressure arrived. Because your reactions are not just responses, they are public confessions of what controls you internally. Most people think influence comes from force, charisma, or constant visibility. They believe the loudest voice controls the room, the most expressive person controls relationships, and the most emotionally available person creates connection. But real influence often operates invisibly. It belongs to the individuals who master selective detachment, the ability to stay emotionally present without becoming emotionally consumed. This kind of detachment unsettles people because it removes the emotional predictability most human interactions depend on. And once people can no longer predict your emotional responses, they begin responding to you differently. Human beings naturally try to read and emotionally measure each other. They look for signs of neediness, insecurity, emotional dependence, or desire for approval. These emotional signals help people understand where influence exists. Someone who constantly seeks validation becomes easy to control through praise or rejection. Someone emotionally dependent on attention becomes vulnerable to silence or withdrawal. Most people unknowingly expose their emotional needs within minutes of interaction. But selectively detached individuals reveal very little. They observe more than they react. They listen more than they explain. They do not rush to prove themselves emotionally. And, because of this, others begin projecting assumptions onto them, trying to decode what they cannot fully access. This creates a strange psychological effect. The less emotionally reactive you become, the more mentally present you become in other people's minds. Silence creates curiosity. Emotional restraint creates tension. Distance creates value. People begin wondering what you think of them because your emotions are no longer openly available for interpretation. This is why calm, emotionally disciplined individuals often command attention without demanding it. Their detachment creates uncertainty, and uncertainty naturally pulls human focus toward it. There is also a darker truth hidden beneath this dynamic. Many relationships, friendships, and social interactions are quietly built around emotional control. People become comfortable when they know exactly how to trigger your reactions, gain your reassurance, or influence your mood. But selective detachment breaks this pattern. When someone realizes they can no longer easily provoke you, guilt you, manipulate you, or emotionally pull you into chaos, they begin losing psychological leverage. And when leverage disappears, power, earned, shifts silently. This does not mean becoming cold, emotionless, or disconnected from humanity. That is weakness disguised as protection. True detachment is emotional discipline. It is the ability to care without losing control of yourself, to observe without absorbing every emotion around you, to remain centered while others become emotionally impulsive. Most people are dragged through life by emotional reactions they never learned to master. But selectively detached individuals move differently. They choose where their emotional energy goes instead of allowing others to decide for them. And the unsettling reality is this: people often become most influenced by the person who appears least emotionally dependent on influencing anyone at all. Because nothing creates more invisible power than someone who cannot easily be emotionally controlled. In the end, the dark psychology of ignoring people is not about cruelty. It is about awareness. It is understanding that attention is power, reactions are access, and emotional control decides who truly owns your mind. Most people spend their lives reacting emotionally to everyone around them. The powerful learn to do something different. Why observe more? They react less, and they become impossible to control. Because the moment people realize they can no longer disturb your peace, they are forced to confront the weakness within themselves.